Delighted to say that the Colonel is back. Mina Rzouki, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Very well. All the better for hearing your dulcet tones. Chicken and chips is on the menu.
Chicken isn't on the menu tonight.
Of course it is. Of course it is. That's why you're the Colonel.
You're right.
I never gave away my secret, and I never will. Unless, of course, some corporate company comes to buy all my shops. Anyway, let's leave that to one side.
We do everything for the dollar.
Exactly. Why not? Mina takes care of any questions you have on European football and players from over there playing in our leagues. The Legendinho's over the other side of the water, taking care of our South American footballing questions and queries. Tim, good morning.
Yeah, good morning. How you doing?
I'm very well, thank you very much. Thanks for asking. You don't usually ask. It's only because Mina set the precedence and raised the bar a little bit better. I'm thankful to you nevertheless.
So even when I'm polite, you attack me. You're just a bully boy, aren't you?
I know. I'm sorry. I can't. You can take the bully out of Tottenham, but you can't take the Tottenham out of the bully, you see. That's where I'm from.
No, it's the other way round.
Is it? Oh, right. It's new. It's nice.
Whatever. I don't know. Whatever.
Nice
I think I knew what you meant.
Yeah, I'm glad you knew what I meant. Do you know what this means? And I'll start off with this one, with your permission, Mina, for Tim. With Oscar well into his career in China, exactly how far is he from a Brazilian national team call-up?
He's been totally forgotten. I can't see him getting back, although China-based players have been called up, and there were two China-based midfielders in the squad that came to Milton Keynes, taking the advice of the Style Council 33 years too late. So Renato Augusto and Paulinho, both China-based, were in the squad, and Oscar is younger than either of them. Another perhaps factor in his favour is, I think, although it's amazing how sometimes the bare stats can deceive you, because since the World Cup, Brazil have played 6 games, they've won them all, and they haven't conceded a single goal. Even so, I think this is the worst time that they've had since the current coach took over 2 years ago. I don't think they're particularly impressive at the moment, and in terms of their attacking play, I really think they're struggling for a blend, which means that anyone who's on the outside maybe stands more of a chance. But it would be a surprise. It would be right out of the blue if Oscar were to come back. But I will be fascinated what he does with the squad. I mean, for the last 3 games, they beat Argentina 1-0 in Saudi Arabia. And then at the Emirates, they beat Uruguay 1-0 with a late penalty. And then they beat Cameroon 1-0 at Milton Keynes. And for those 3 games, he went with Roberto Firmino at centre forward. And I really don't think it's working at all. I mean, the idea is that, yeah, he brought Firmino off at half time against Cameroon, which is almost like an admission of defeat. I did a TV show with him a couple of weeks back before the Uruguay game. And I said, if you're going to go with Firmino up front, where's your depth going to come from? And he says, yeah, I know that's a problem, because the idea is that Firmino drops to combine. 2 things. Firstly, he hasn't been combining. And I know Neymar didn't really play against Cameroon. He came off after 7 minutes. But against both Argentina and against Uruguay, there was no relationship whatsoever between Neymar and Firmino. And the other thing is, well, if he's going to drop, who is going to fill the space? Who is going to yeah. Well, and his answer to that was Neymar, which I think is a false answer, because Neymar likes to drop and to orchestrate, and whoever attacks down the right. Now he's gone there with Douglas Costa, and he's gone with William. And I don't think either are right for that. No, and both would be fine if you had a penalty area predator. I actually think his best bet is Richarlison, because Richarlison is like a mixture of a wide striker and a centre forward. And as he showed with the goal that he scored against Cameroon, which was a classic centre forward goal headed in from a corner, and the coach recognises that Richarlison's a little bit like a racehorse wearing blinkers. He only looks forward. So as an out and out centre forward, I think that's difficult against the stronger defences, the teams that you need to elaborate, that you need your centre forward to be able to receive the ball back to goal and combine. That's not really Richarlison's game. But you put him wide right, able to cut in. And there, I think he's useful. And certainly when he came on, Argentina, Uruguay and Cameroon, they got more attacking thrust out of him. Talking about Oscar, I can't quite see where he would fit in at the moment, and they're not really playing a playmaker in that central position. And maybe he would compete with a fellow who was injured and missed these last two games, Felipe Coutinho, once of Liverpool, now of Barcelona. Now the coach very much sees Coutinho as part of his midfield trio, which I think is a gamble. I think it cost them in the World Cup. It's something that Barcelona seem to have given up on. And it does leave your midfield very, very open defensively. And the way he's looking to balance that out is having a more cautious role from his fullbacks than Brazil have played for decades and decades. He wants his fullbacks tucking inside and constructing from deep rather than being auxiliary wingers. But now there's no FIFA dates until the end of March. And he has to have a serious think, I think, about the attacking balance of his side. So maybe there's an opportunity for Oscar, but at the moment, he's, as Smokey Robinson once sung, he's out of the picture, off of the screen.
Well done.
So there's effectively no number 9, except for Gabriel Jesus.
Unless you class Richarlison as a number 9, or he goes back to Gabriel Jesus, which is again a possibility. I mean, there is a real crisis in Brazilian football with centre forwards. And if you look at the way they play, their domestic football plays, the defensive lines play very, very deep. Most people now are playing 4-2-3-1, but the centre forward is like 40 metres from the rest of the team. They are killing their centre forwards. There's no one around. And one who perhaps might be worth a punt, although he's almost completely unknown to the mainstream Brazilian audience, is Joelinton, who plays for Hoffenheim in Germany. There might be something there as a target man centre forward, but I think they need a little bit more penalty area presence, because on his midfield trio, it's going to be on Casemiro to hold, Arthur to knit, and Coutinho to create from in the last 30. And that's one of the reasons he brought Paulinho back for this squad. Yeah, and he brought Paulinho back for this squad because Paulinho in recent years has almost like become a false 9. You know, he's almost given up being a midfielder and just bombs into the penalty area. It was an admission that he's lacking penalty area presence. Well, it's up to him now to, he's got a few months to sit around and have a look at the jigsaw. But the centre forward position is a worry.
It's a worry for Italians as well. We don't have a number 9.
Yeah,
where are they? Where are they all? Yeah. Where have they gone?
I don't know. It's the rise of the false number 9. It's the rise of I guess, I don't know, players that make it easier for wingers to become something special, right?
Well, yeah, we've got one here in England, obviously, in Harry Kane. But otherwise, is it down to clubs? Is it because of what clubs are asking from centre forwards, Mina? That the traditional number 9, the blinkered racehorse, although Harry Kane isn't a blinkered racehorse, to be fair to him.
Nevertheless,
not at all, far from it. But, the traditional number 9, who is there in the opposition penalty area waiting, the fox in the box, or, whatever, the guy that heads a ball in. Is it because of what clubs are asking of their forwards? Is that why there isn't a traditional number 9 in Italy?
There is a traditional number 9. We have several in the likes of Ciro Immobile and obviously Mario Balotelli and Belotti, but they're just bad. I mean, they're not bad. I mean, that's a horrible word to use actually to define someone, but they're just not that great, to be honest. And nowadays, football is centered around the element of unpredictability. And whereas a number 9, it all becomes that much easier to defend against, right? A cross is going to come in or what it is that, you just protect your number 9 as a defender, and then that other team doesn't have a reference point. So now the whole point is that everyone moves around so much, drop deep, bring in others, let pace play a center stage, let midfield raiders take over. I mean, at the moment, you could say that, I mean, my particular team has got 2 number 9s, right? In the sense it's Mario Mandzukic and Cristiano Ronaldo, but sort of none of them. I guess Mandzukic is a number 9, but a lot of the time he's a facilitator, I like those kind of players. I've never loved a great number 9. I've never been a fan of it. And if anything, there was this interview with Mauro Icardi as to why he never made it in Barcelona. And he just said he arrived at a time where it just became out of fashion to become a predator in the box, a guy that just scores goals. And personally, I watch him play and I think to are you guys still there? Because it's very quiet. Hello?
No, still we're listening.
Oh, you're there. Okay.
Hanging on your every word.
Exactly.
Don't leave us hanging on the telephone.
Oh, yeah. He's on the song quoting trajectory this morning. But anyway, we'll get there eventually.
Well, we're 50 years exactly from the release of the White Album when we talk about number 9.
I didn't know
number
that.
9. Number 9. Go on, Mina. Take it away.
So now I feel like...
Look, you've had a little water break. Take it away.
No, so I was just saying, as in the number 9, it's a luxury player now, just someone who's there to score goals. You need to be able to do more for your team than just be somebody who score goals. When we talk about my personal favorite will always be Karim Benzema. I think he's a great number 9 for the simple sake that he knows how to facilitate hit the players around him. He knows when to be selfish, and you can see that now, especially under Solari. When he wants to be a great striker, he can be. When he wants to facilitate Ronaldo, he could. He's that, for me, your perfect number 9. But then there's obviously the likes of Sergio Aguero. But a guy who's a fox in the box, it's out of fashion, and you deem them as a luxury player because what else is he going to provide, right? And it's almost like we've evaporated them. Like we've killed them off, and due to so much innovation and midfielders now becoming raiders or defenders scoring your goals, that they're not necessary.
Fashion's
Mina,
come
what do
and
you
go,
think
though.
about? Yeah, what do you think about the changes that VAR might bring into the game? Because on one thing that we're already seeing, I think, with the use of VAR, is more handballs being given. I mean, River Plate, for example, we've got the second leg of the final of the Libertadores coming up in a few hours' time. Now, River Plate only qualified for it because of a VAR penalty. It was a handball. And I think that we're going to get more handballs and more things given in the penalty area. Does that mean, do you think that there will be a move towards having more penalty area presence, more old-fashioned number 9s in order to put pressure on the opposition in the penalty area and pick up penalties?
Good question.
Yeah, it's a great question. You know what? I think so. And I think that the recent... This is an interesting thing because one thing I've never liked about watching Spanish games is refereeing. I've always felt it was very severe in the Spanish league. And as soon as the ball touches a hand, whether it's clear that the player can't do anything with the position of his hand or it's clear that it's not deliberate, it was always given. Now, interestingly enough, we're seeing in Italy that there was a game recently between Juventus and Milan, and Benatia's hand touched the ball, and it was a handball, we'll be honest. Referee didn't give it. VAR made him go back and see it again. And when he saw it again, he gave it. Now, interestingly enough, when you look at it in slow motion, it looks like, there's a potential of it being deliberate. But the commentator was adamant.
Everything's a penalty in slow motion, isn't it?
Precisely.
This worries me a little bit.
Precisely that. Everything looks deliberate, right? And then, but the commentator was so adamant in his in the debate that they were having on TV that this was in no way, shape, or form a penalty. And everyone that I've spoken to, obviously, you could be a Milan fan or you could be Juve fan. I honestly didn't know because to me, it didn't look like a penalty, but people were like, no, it's clear because VAR then even gave it. And I was like, I don't know about this. I don't know. It's also about that whole thing in the World Cup where clinging on to players, right? Do you remember that game? Generally, so I was going to say that Celtic game in the Champions League. What about if you hold on to players in the World Cup when it was like you saw that often in the box, the way that they were defending, if it was slightly aggressive or if it was very aggressive, usually it won you something. Then what it becomes is football starts becoming about ways that you can exploit and manipulate referees into giving you things that you're not supposed to have. It's no longer about the technique in the game, but how far you can get from certain positions, such as free kicks. Or it's one of the reasons why England did so well, And does that mean that it's going to be based on how you manipulate the referees going forward, how it looks like on VAR? Is that going to change the way that you start acting or not acting? Or And for me, I do think that it can bring back the number 9 because it's obviously you'll always give the benefit of the doubt to the striker, in my opinion.
It brings me to mind this tweet that I've received from Carl, who says, and just bear with me on this, he said, in the last 10 years, football's seen a dramatic rise in the sophistication levels that go into match analysis, player performance, etc. What do Mina and Tim think will be the most beneficial area in the future for the game to grow in this regard? You're welcome to answer that, but in regards of VAR, which is an ongoing debate, given that it's making football sophisticated in a certain way, what do you think? Well, that's the intention, at least, isn't it? To take it out of the hands of the traditional, somewhat archaic decision-making of a referee that couldn't possibly have seen so many of the incidents in the penalty area. But what do you think overall so far has been the impact? Has it been positive or negative for the way that the game is played rather than the outcome?
One thing I have to say about VAR is while I'm completely on board with it and I do like the use of technology, there is a case against it in the sense that if it's used too much and relied upon too much, which I think is going to go that way if I'm honest, then what you end up seeing is teams that don't command possession and play a certain style of football with a certain philosophy will end up losing because it will be a stop-start game. It will be constantly like a little bit of fighting, let's check VAR. A little bit of pushing and shoving in the box, let's check VAR. Let's wait for the analysis. Is this or not? Is this a yellow card? Is this... My feeling is that the more we have technology, the more we'll end up being dependent on it. And then when you start a game, it then becomes about finding the little ways that you can win the match as opposed to winning it through a style of football, winning it through actual playing of football. That's the only way that I can see it being negative. But when you watch your team obviously failing at an important step, I mean, I can imagine Bayern Munich fans, 2 seasons in a row watching Champions League thinking it's farcical that we've gone out because actually, maybe we haven't played the best football in the competition, but we've lost to some unjust decisions, and it drives you so crazy that you think it's unbelievable. But it has to be, how do you stop it taking over? How do you stop technology and allow it to just be a source of help as opposed to being something you rely on entirely?
How about you, Tim? Are you for allowing VAR to stop in the name of love, or are you for allowing it to let the four winds blow? Let them blow, let them blow.
I mean, I think I'm probably not the only one.
From the east to the west.
I'm not the only one with mixed emotions. But I have got mixed feelings about it. I can see the plus points, but I think that one of its biggest failings is the people who've been behind it, who've been pushing it, who've pushed it as a panacea, and they've oversold their product. Because the idea is it comes up with definitive answers, and it doesn't. It is bound to disappoint. It will always disappoint because you are asking for a definitive answer on a subject on which there is no definitive answer. On lots of handball decisions, there is no definitive answer. There is so much interpretation there on the position of the...
In tennis, the technology comes
because it's not a thing of technology. It's a thing of interpretation. And I think with handball, they're going to have to really work on this, on what qualifies as deliberate handball and not. I mean, they've tried to put in the laws a thing of unnatural hand position and so on. But times where, and I've seen this in Brazil. In Brazil on pre-VAR, they adopted a criteria where any as Mina was talking about from Spain there, any time the ball hit the arm, it was handball. And the effects of this is which of the two things is easier? Beating the entire defensive system and putting the ball past the goalkeeper, or blasting the ball against someone's arm from 2 yards and screaming penalty? Obviously, exactly. The latter. So that's what everyone does. That's what everyone did. And, a lot of cheap penalties. And you change there the objective of the game. The objective of the game, instead of doing the hard yards and trying to score a goal, it becomes, blasting the ball against an arm and then yelling penalty. There are a number of problems I have with VAR, and one is the way that it treats the supporters inside the stadium, almost like as a kind of studio audience. And the other is that it will always disappoint, because this promise of the definitive answer in so many cases is not a promise that can be kept. But just quickly on the wider point that Carl mentioned on analysis and so on, we're at a phase now where you can get bombarded with numbers and you can be blinded with the numbers. I imagine that part of the future will be refining these numbers into what's useful and what's not. And a lot of the past statistics you get are just useless. They don't tell you anything. They don't tell you whether the ball's being used well or not. They don't even tell you if the pass has served any purpose or not. So there's a way of refining that. There's I think two German former players have developed it, a pass analysis that tells you how many opposing players were taken out of the game by the pass. You know, like a pass between a square ball between one centre back to the other centre back achieves nothing. Or you can switch the point of the attack from that, but you haven't played any opponents out of the game, and it's achieved nothing. But a pass that goes 30 yards diagonal and takes 3 or 4 opponents out of the game, well, that's certainly achieved something. And so a formula is being developed to try and measure that, to try and measure how well the ball has been used. I think that's probably the future of statistical analysis, refining the bombardment of numbers that we've got into something that actually tells you something about what's happened on the field.
But don't you think there's a difference in interpretation between countries? For example, know, the beauty of a tackle. That is, like the great defenders in some countries will see, well, look at him, he manages 8 tackles a game. He's, strong, and he's this and whatever. Or I don't know, some of the greats, or in Italy, if you have a high number of tackles, it means usually you're in the wrong position. Isn't it about that?
Exactly. Exactly. And again, see that's a stat that doesn't tell you very much. And the Chopper, you're too young to remember Chopper Harris of Chelsea. But Ron Harris used to say this in the 60s and early 70s. He used to say, my best games were ones when I didn't have to make any tackles, because it meant I was always there first, And how many desperate tackles did Franco Baresi make? He didn't have to make very many, because he got there first. He was in the right position. So again, that's another stat that has to be refined. Because, as I'm saying, we're at the stage now where you're bombarded with numbers and not a lot of them tell you a great deal.
But then again, if you look at, for example, when I look at great Italian defenders, perhaps this season, I'm not saying over a number of, obviously there's no Franco Baresis or Maldinis anymore, but Chiellini has a high number of tackles, and he probably is the best Italian centre-back that we have at the moment, despite his age. Whereas you could look at Leonardo Bonucci, and he's a lot more beautiful in his style of play, a lot better launches, more interceptions, or whatever it is. But actually, he's also capable of one giant error. Like, can statistics really give you the whole story?
No. Without switching on your brain, obviously not. No, that's all. At the end, the statistic is only a tool to help your brain reach better conclusions.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, 08085 909 693. I think we've taken this conversation.
If we just keep passing the ball between ourselves, Mina, he can't bully us. That's the way that we do it. We keep him as Piggy in the middle.
Well, yeah, no, I'm enjoying it. I'm kicking back, mate. It's about time you did some work for all that money that you earn. 08085, no, not from us, obviously, from all your other extracurricular activities. 08085 909 693 is the number to call if you'd like to join in this conversation. You can text us on 85058. Email upallnight@bbc.co.uk. If you want to take the questions on football in Europe and South America, or indeed players from those regions playing in our leagues, if you want to take them to the philosophical level that Tim and Mina have done so far, then feel free as well. And this is a teaser for both of you to contemplate during the news and sport. And this came from John in Bournemouth. This was his sub-question to the question about Oscar in China. He said, sub-question, this week a BBC documentary on the Foreign Office claimed that Abuja, the Nigerian capital, and Lagos, the former Nigerian capital, were British Airways' most lucrative route, owing to Nigerians' penchant for travelling first class. This one for you, Mina, from Mark, who says, since this is the first time you've been on the programme in a few weeks now, can we get Mina to take us back to her emotions watching Juventus's vaunted defence capitulate to Manchester United in that Champions League match? We are after the watershed.
I'm not sure capitulated was the right word for it.
It's more about your emotions, I think, rather than
to be honest,
what's the right word.
I sort of saw it coming. What I found so interesting is a lot of people called me before that match to be like, oh, so can you tell us a bit about Juventus? Give us the background. Obviously defensively strong. We talked about Harvard in the first match. And I was like, if you've watched Juventus this season, you'll notice they're actually poor defensively. I think a lot of times you think something about a team based on their reputation. And you almost forget that can change. It's like we were having this conversation actually the other day. It was Gab Marcotti was talking about how certain players will always be like Godin, Diego Godin has had a terrible season. But you mentioned his name and everyone was like, fantastic centre-back. Wow, what a season. You know Atletico's doing well because Godin's probably going to do everything in the back. Well, actually, he's been a liability at the back this season for Atletico Madrid. And he's had he's made a few more mistakes than you would ever imagine Godin to make. And so it's a little bit like people look at Juventus and think, yup, defensively organised. It's Bonucci and Chiellini. What are we going to expect? And nothing but the best. Actually, Bonucci has made about a mistake a game. Chiellini is also 34 years old. And despite how good he is, there is a certain limit to their brilliance because they're playing with Szczesny. Which means there's a lack of, they're not as, this sounds horrible to say this, but they don't trust him as much as they trust Gianluigi Buffon. And the way you know that is not through their words in which they tell you they absolutely trust him, but rather the fact that they tend to play deeper with him. And that tells you that they're not entirely sure how he's going to handle himself on certain crosses.
I'm sure he's noticed, as well.
Yeah, so when you're playing that much deeper and, you've got Ronaldo telling you how you should defend against a penalty by Higuain, and, he's not going to do that with Buffon, right? So there is a certain level of things have changed at the back, and you can see them, they've still got a tight defense, they still don't ship, goals too often. My issue with them, I was angry with them from the first round too, because they played great football for 45 minutes and then totally took their foot off the gas because this is what they do in all their games. Once they feel superior to an opponent, they don't bother anymore. And that's how they lose. And it was like they were scared a bit of United. So they played this really great first half and then thought, yeah, you know what? We've got this in the bag. Stop bothering afterwards. They were still stronger and they didn't concede a goal. Although in my opinion, honestly, I was shocked by the second half, even if they did control it. But they're not a team that can win 1-0 like they did once upon a time under Marcello Lippi in the mid-90s, They are a team that will absolutely concede a goal, especially if you push them deep, especially if you apply a little bit, physicality to it. Cancelo is much more of an attacker than he is a defender. So there's a gap for you to exploit. Bonucci can be easily overwhelmed. Khedira's not the, young boy he was that knows how to fill gaps that are left by some of the marauding defenders, and he hasn't been available. Midfield at times doesn't pick up on those voids that are and gaps. So I would say this is what I think. Sometimes you see a team and you think, yeah, they're going to be really good at the back, or and that puts off teams trying to do something special. But always go for it. Always take a chance. Like I just loved when Arsenal once did that to Bayern Munich. They just kept running at them and you saw them get results out of it. Just do it with Juventus because I'm telling you, they will concede. So I wasn't annoyed about that. I was annoyed that they didn't make the most of the many chances they did create, because if there's one thing Juventus can do this season is actually create chances. They're much better going forward, so take advantage of that.
Yeah, June Atlanta says there's a report in The Guardian that CONMEBOL wants to go to a World Cup every 2 years. Is this a serious proposal? And if so, what are the panelists' thoughts on this? Tim first.
Let's go.
This is South America's response to this Nations League that you've come up with, which seems to be working very well. And remember how dependent FIFA are from a financial point of view on the World Cup. So that they'd have one every day if they could, I mean, it provides so much of their revenue. So you can see why they would be open to it, and you could see why South America would be open to it as well, because it gets them in the game that Europe is now dominating all the more now that you have this this Nations League. It would mean the end of the continental competitions, wouldn't it? I can't imagine where the space would be found to stage a European Championships and Asian and South American and African and so on. So it would mean the end of that, but it spreads it all around, and I think it's a proposal that it warrants serious analysis. I don't know if Mina agrees, but I can see plenty of advantages, especially if you're in prison. Now imagine you're in prison, only another 3 World Cups, Ted, and you'll be out. You now get a World Cup every 2 years. You might get out earlier.
Yeah,
but then don't you think it loses prestige if it's every 2 years?
2 years, it's still a long time, isn't it? 2 years is it's still a fair old. I would miss the continental competitions. I would miss them. I would miss the opportunity to.
You've had like 15 Copa Americas in like 3 years.
Yeah, and we're going to have some more, and I would miss them. But 4 years is a long, long time in a player's career, isn't it? It's a huge amount. So I can see it. I think it's something that warrants study.
Mina, Kapil in Leicester says, who do you think will win in the following of the weekend's fixtures and why? Udinese versus Roma and Lazio versus Milan.
Who do I think will win?
And why?
Oh, so that's interesting that it's only about the Italian league. Udinese versus Roma.
Tell them on Monday.
That's the best answer.
Tell them on Monday.
When I'm going to know the results.
I don't like Mondays.
Wait till the podcast on Monday.
I don't like Mondays. So, as we say, it's Saturday night and I just got paid. Food about my money, don't try to save.
Okay, Udinese versus Roma. The Serie A is a really interesting league this week, this year. I think this is an interesting one because Roma might rest Dzeko because there's a game against Real Madrid in the Champions League. And they might not take Udinese seriously. Udinese sacked their coach in Velasquez, a Spaniard, who they trusted perhaps too much and gave him free rein in the beginning because he is very talented. Now they've gone with Davide Nicola, and he's training them a lot harder at the minute. It's an extra 30 minutes on the training ground with him. He is very concerned with their movements, and he is very detail orientated. He was famous at the time for saying, if he managed to keep Crotone up, then he'd go, cycling around Italy. I think he's a tremendously great coach, so I'm really happy to see him have this opportunity. And they're going to be very geared up for a win. I don't think they have the talent of Roma, but if Roma drop their concentration levels, which they tend to do against teams that they don't feel are very strong, i.e. Bologna, then this could be an interesting game. Roma have developed a taste for champagne football after their Champions League heroics last season and seem to only perform when it matters. So that'll be interesting to see how both handle it. Lazio Milan. Milan have no team. They've got no defense at the moment. They literally have succumbed to 12 injuries. They have a midfield that's void of any creativity without Biglia as well. Bonaventura is out. Romagnoli's out, their captain. Caldara's been out for a while. So it's a little bit of a disaster. Obviously, Higuain had a red card against Juventus, so he's out for 2 matches. They've only got Cutrone, number 9, who's a youngster. So Çalhanoğlu may not be available either. I mean, there is no team. On paper, they should be better, but there is no team. And Lazio are great exploiting situations. Simone Inzaghi has probably a higher winner percentage than Gattuso based on statistics, despite how stupid statistics are. And I agree with that. I think it's Lazio's.
Okay, nice and succinct. Try this one for you, Tim. Nice and succinct, please, yeah? Bill,
I like the philosophical ones.
I do as well. I do like the philosophical ones.
And I like the small, quick ones too.
Yeah,
I like a blend.
Yeah. All of that. Yeah, well, let's encapsulate all of those permutations of a question into this one, yeah? My favourite MLS club, Tim, you ready for this?
Yeah, go on.
You can answer questions on the MLS, can you?
I can't.
Probably not, but, We'll
have a go. You'll have a go.
We'll grab this tiger by the tail and try and drag it south of the border.
Seize the time. As one great philosopher once said, you might remember it. My favourite MLS club, New York Red Bulls, has a chance to end its 23-year title curse this fall, which is autumn to you and I. What are examples of... I know you knew that. What are the other examples, or what are examples of other cursed clubs in the pundits' regions? What are the origins of those curses, and how close are the clubs to vexing them? Tim? First?
Very superstitious. I'm trying to remember which club it is in Argentina, but there was a curse placed on them. And apparently frogs were buried around the stadium as part of this curse.
Always something buried in this stadium.
Yeah.
It's not a football shirt of their competitors. It's frogs.
No, it's a frog. Yeah. So they had to go around digging them all up, digging them.
Well, they really were there.
Fine.
Were there,
yeah.
Were there really frogs there?
Yeah. The frogs
God.
buried. You're dealing with a very, very superstitious continent. Well, I hope they were dead when they were buried. I hope so. And I hope they were buried respectfully. I can't remember which club that is, but in South America is full of those kind of stories.
But what kind of a curse is that? What kind of a curse is frogs burying frogs? What does that curse do to South America?
Well, it's kind of bad luck.
A frog is bad luck.
You can go to these kind of like faith healer type things. My stepdaughter won't thank me for this, but I had to pay for this once. I had to pay for a kind of faith healing session, and all kinds of animals I think were used in that, and to no appreciative aim that I could see. My favourite story, I've told it before, but I think it's a brilliant superstitious story, is Botafogo here in Rio, a club absolutely dominated by superstition, and they play in black and white stripes, kind of Newcastle stripes, and they used to have, this is in the 50s, they used to have a dog, kind of black and white dog, and the president, he used to carry the dog into the stadium, and at times when Botafogo needed to slow the rhythm of the game down, he used to throw the dog out on the field, and the dog used to run around, and that used to slow the rhythm of the game down. But anyway, there was one game where before the game, in the dressing room, the dog, shall we say, relieved itself all over the right back.
Did a whoopsie.
And they won. And so that obviously became part of the ritual. It meant that the poor old right back, he had to have the dog urinating on him in the dressing room every game before the game. As and they carried that one on until they lost, where I suspect the right back probably scored 2 own goals.
Could have been worse.
Just to break the curse and stop the dog relieving itself all over him. It's a very superstitious part of the world.
Could have been worse, though, is all I can say for that right back. Could have been worse. Mina, how about superstition then? Curses.
Okay.
Curses,
yeah. Rather curses. Benfica is the one that I guess is probably the most famous. You already know this one, Tim.
I've heard of it too, but go ahead.
Oh, so is this boring? Shall I figure out another one?
No, quite.
Well, just because, they've been cursed in the sense that they will be doomed to lose every European final. There was a curse that was put on them, I think, in 1960 something.
By a manager, wasn't it?
By a manager, Gutman,
yes.
who very English way of saying this, I guess. And basically, he wanted a pay rise, right? Wasn't that the story initially? He wanted a pay rise, didn't get it, and after leading to back-to-back trophies at the time, thought to himself, "You'll never see and you'll never win a European final for 100 years." So they don't have that much longer to go.
They still got half a century or so, or 40, is it? 30, 40 years? I can't remember exactly when he did, because I've read the book. It's a fascinating book, about Gutman, and it's because
he's a fascinating figure.
He is
huge. He plays a huge role in Brazilian football as well.
Yeah,
and before he was at
61,
Benfica, he was in Brazil.
They won the Champions League. They were a huge team. And he was the guy
they sacked him when they were top of the league or something. That's what he was so angry about.
And he was
the
angry.
amount of disrespect that it was offered, because
wasn't there sort of a sense that it was slightly anti-Semitism was behind the reluctance to give him a pay rise? At least that was the perception from the book that I read.
Perhaps.
Yeah, well.
I didn't know that.
It was a right wing dictatorship in Portugal at the time, the Salazar dictatorship. So maybe that's part of the story.
It's a
it's
fascinating
only 46
one,
years to go.
because apparently, if I'm right, didn't Eusebio go to his grave? Was it go to Gutman's grave to sort of, beg the
To pray for
spirit?
the curse to be lifted. Yes,
Yeah,
I know.
exactly.
I've heard that too.
Yeah, you think, hang on a second, it was only a curse. No need to go that far, for goodness sake. Wait your time and it would be over and done with eventually. But that's fascinating. I mean, the footballers we see on the pitch doing all their superstitious rituals are part of the legend of the game, but actually it's the curses that the clubs feel are against them.
So one thing that intrigues me is supporter superstition. I went to a game in the week, and there was a fellow got talking to me on the underground going to the stadium, who was telling me that he's now 33, and ever since 2001, he's a Flamengo fan. Well, Flamengo won a title with a free kick in the last minute in 2001. So that's 17 and a half years ago now. And he makes a point. He was only like 15 or 16 then. And he makes a point of wearing the same clothes he was wearing that day every time Flamengo get to a final.
Does it work?
And, well, the times when Flamengo got to finals and lost, he hasn't been wearing those clothes, because they're a bit small for him now, so he looks ridiculous in them. He looks like, so if he's actually going to go to the game, if it's at home, he feels a bit stupid putting on those clothes that he was wearing when he was 15. So, and they lose. But people really believe this. They really invest, and I think that's part of it. That's part of the magic of the game. The idea that we as supporters, our behaviour our entirely insignificant behaviour will have some effect on the outcome.
Yeah, I do believe that myself. I always feel like I need to listen to a particular song before certain matches, or my team will lose.
Yeah, it's Go West, isn't it? It's Go West. You're such an 80s kid.
I really am. But you know what I thought was really interesting is that I remember watching this documentary, and it was like a Spanish one and it was like Raul and a bunch of players speaking from, when they won their Septima, and about like the beauty of winning that match. And obviously they destroyed Juventus to win 1-0 at the time. And Raul said that the one thing that really made him want to kill Juve at the time was that Angelo Di Livio had come out and he had written 1-0 on the back of his hand in marker pen. And he thought that was so disrespectful. And he basically pointed it to them and said, this is how you're going to lose. You're going to lose 1-0 because we're Juve and we win 1-0. And he said that was enough to drive us so insane that we wanted to win by that scoreline, because I thought it was such a huge sign of disrespect. And I remember thinking how interesting that you just see something and it would incentivize you to just go and do whatever you can to win it, especially at a time when actually Real Madrid weren't the favourites. And I was talking to Paul Lambert, Borussia Dortmund, and he said that in their match, Di Livio had come out with 3-1. And that's exactly the scoreline that Dortmund won by 2. So I'm thinking, if you already lost by doing this strategy, then perhaps don't do it a second time against Real Madrid. But there's and the fact is, he got both scorelines right. It just was that they were defeated by that scoreline as opposed to won by it.
You see, I think the fascinating thing is not so much the curses and the superstition, but the impact it has on the other team. Yeah. The other team feels like, we're not going to lose on this ground because they've got the curse. We're not going to lose against Benfica in the Champions League final because they've got this curse on them. I think that is the biggest impact, rather, for me, than the other way around. The same thing Julie points out by text. It was a similar thing anyway. Surely, regarding VAR, we should understand that referees making mistakes is as much part of the game as players making mistakes. It's a people's game and all people make mistakes. In my view, VAR seems to make as many mistakes as the ref and holds the hand up to boot. You see, in a normal game, in a normal match, the players know that the ref will make a mistake or may not see them tug the other player's shirt or whatever it is. We know that's part of the game. once you take that out of the game, it destroys a certain amount of the game, doesn't it?
I agree entirely with this, and I understand that this is all about human error, and we are, that was essentially what we liked about football. It's a working class sport. It's based around these guys that run around and tackle each other and hurt each other, and it's a contact sport, and people make mistakes, and then the best team win, right? But now it's not that. Now it's a win or a loss can effectively make you win or lose 54 million. At least I remember that was like a figure that was being quoted as to how like a certain mistake committed by a referee in a Champions League semi-final can cost a team that much money. And then it becomes that mistake is no longer tolerated. That mistake, it cannot happen, because if a player makes a mistake and he gets red carded, he got his punishment immediately. If a referee makes a mistake, what happens? Nothing. You have to move on and accept a decision that is wrong in every shape or form, and you've destroyed potential careers or made a club lose 54 million or the amount of prestige. Or imagine that club is Paris Saint-Germain, who've just spent and injected billions into the creation of their squad, and then they have a referee who just made a mistake. You have to have VAR now because it's too much of an expensive sport.
Al in East Finchley says, unbelievably, I'm taking my family to Rio on the 4th of April 2019 for a couple of weeks. Last weekend's stay in Milton Keynes was a rare treat, so going to Brazil will be off the scale. Please, please say that there will be some top football in Rio between the 5th and the 15th of April 2019. I've got an awful feeling it's the closed season, but the interweb info seems fake.
No worries. There will be football. What there won't be, I don't think, is the Brazilian Championship, the national championship. What you'll get there is that the closing stages of the Rio State Championship. There may well be midweek games in the Brazilian Cup. And if you're lucky, games in the Copa Libertadores, South America's Champions League. And Flamengo of Rio certainly have qualified. So there will clearly be football, either at the Maracanã or at the Nilton Santos, or maybe Vasco's ground. So you are in luck, Al. See you there.
When should we not go to Brazil or even other places in South America then? When does their season end?
High summer. Which is not very far away. The Brazilian Championship ends start of December, and we don't get going again until the end of January. Some in South America don't get going again until kind of mid-February, and quite often, like June, July, there'll be a pause for international tournaments. Apart from that, it's pretty much all year round.
So don't go to South America for Christmas or New Year.
No, you get a charity game, but nothing serious. It's too hot anyway. You wouldn't want it. You don't want to run around in there.
And do you know if the stats prove that to be the case? Does tourism sink during that month or two?
No, not at all. No, it's high tourism because people are here for New Year and so on. But no games to go to. It's a shame.
They've got a carnival to think about anyway, haven't they? They need time to consider that. Do you know that we're talking about the curse of the frogs? Or the curse of the toads, as they will now forever be known. And Mark points out, because you asked the question, or was it me that asked the question? One of us asked the question, how bad can a curse of toads be? Well, ask the pharaohs. Remember that? Well, goes back a few thousand years, I know, but there was a plague of locusts and there was a plague of frogs, I seem to remember, and they never got over it. Not the pharaohs, anyway. Brought about their downfall eventually, in a kind of a way. Anyway, so don't sniff at that. And also, going back to VAR, Alan has pointed out, I don't know about you, but I think it's a good idea. Going back to my tennis analogy, so you scoffed when I brought in the tennis, but Alan says VAR would work best if it was done on a coach's call basis. Say
I'm against.
Yeah, totally.
I'll tell you what.
Okay, let me finish it first. Let me finish it. I know, you can tell me why. He says, say one call per half, for each half. One call per coach per half giving the coaches a flag to call for the use of VAR during a match would also make the game more exciting, or chucking a handkerchief onto the pitch as they do in American football, I suppose. Hey, extra time or 5. I want to take 5, you know? So you're against it. Tim, so you, Mina? Tim first.
I can see the attractiveness of it, and maybe it would work, but my big fear is that it becomes not a method of using sports justice, it becomes a method of game management. So last few minutes, teams in the last few minutes will do, if they're winning, they will do anything to slow the game down. They'll do anything to do it. You see lots of substitutions being made. I mean, one of the changes that it seems that the International Board are thinking of now is to try and speed up this thing of substitutions, where the player can just leave the pitch it has to leave the pitch by the nearest available route. He doesn't have to walk all the way to the halfway line, because sides are just spending so long making a substitution. The thing that's driving me mad in South American football at the moment is last few minutes. If the home side are winning, the ball boys disappear. There is no ball boys. You can't get the ball back. And every time the goalkeeper is called into action, he is always on the floor. And that's 5 minutes gone, because I have to come on and get treatment. It's a disgrace. It's methods that are put in order to protect the physical integrity of the players are being used to interrupt the rhythm of the game. And I think that's an absolute disgrace. And my fear with this, you give the coaches the possibility of doing this, it just becomes something that they will definitely use. If there is no reason to use it in the last few minutes when they're winning, they will find a reason to use it purely and simply to slow the game down. And I think there's too much of that as it is.
I mean, what were your reservations about this?
Exactly the same as that, like if it's a moment in which they're feeling very overwhelmed, they will obviously call it on to distract, to stop. This is where I tell you that VAR will be, it will be used as a weapon to just game, management of the game. It's exactly the way that Tim said it, or just to waste time if you don't. Having said that, though, when I heard the rest of it in the sense that they're only allowed 1 per half, it's easier to swallow. If they're only allowed 1 call per half. But it's true, if there's no reason for it, then, but what happens if you've used up your call and then something really big happens at the end? It's a very difficult question. This is where I tell you the problem with things and great rules in football is a lot of the time the intentions are wonderful, but the way they're manipulated makes you realize that there's too many coaches nowadays who will look for any small advantage to use it for their team. And I know that, considering what Italians do.
Okay, that was a difficult question. This one will be an easy one for you. I'm sure it will be. I'm sure. Well, on a scale of 1 to 10, 9.5 in terms of easy. Is that okay?
9.5.
Underarm, bowl it.
Yeah.
Bowl it underarm for us.
Underarm, soft and gentle, yeah?
Yeah.
Soft and gentle, okay. I was going to, but then I've cut it out of I wanted to buy some time there. I got caught, I'm afraid. I did get caught there. I should be able to find it eventually. But meanwhile, I'll bow you another one. Meanwhile, this is from Bhavesh, who says, Dear Polka Dot, as the esteemed panel mentioned the paucity of number 9s earlier on, who do they think are the current top 5? Kane, Lewandowski have got to be there. Does modern day training, this is the interesting part, does modern day training or scouting inhibit the talent of the number 9s? And do Mina and Tim think previous greats like Lineker, Risto Stojkovic, is it Stoichkov? Apologies.
Stoichkov.
Yeah, Stoichkov. Van Basten, Romario, would they thrive in the modern day football?
I'd like to think that great players thrive in any arena. So I definitely think those guys would have done it well. I know that football's evolved and obviously everything is in its own time. The great number 9s, I think that's such an interesting question because this was a debate that was brought up in Italy recently because it was pitting two Argentines against one another in Mauro Icardi versus Gonzalo Higuain when it was the Milan derby. And they're two very different number nines. And they are still even more different to the likes of Karim Benzema or or Sergio Aguero or Lewandowski. I'm not a fan of Lewandowski. And I know...
He scores goals, though. He scores goals.
So does Mario Gomez.
I know.
Once upon a time.
I know. Yeah.
But obviously Lewandowski is much better than Gomez. That's not my intention to say it like that. I'm not a fan of him because, again, I think it all depends on what you find is to be really interesting or really good for your own team. You know, is it accuracy? If you have a team of hard workers and there's a guy like Mauro Icardi in the box that you just know will always convert, even if your team has played terrible football for 89 minutes, but you know he'll get a half chance on the 90th and he makes that difference. Or do you value somebody like Gonzalo Higuain, who's more of a forward as well as a striker, in the sense that he can also facilitate the play of in the final third? He knows how to assist. He knows how to roam around the pitch. His positioning is wonderful, not necessarily efficient in his finishing, you know? Or do you prefer someone who's like a Didier Drogba, you know, like... It's so interesting. Well, one of the reasons why I will never be a fan of Lewandowski too much is because I think he's easily intimidated by strong centre-backs. And it's one of the reasons why I've always been harsh on Dybala, who's more of a number 10. But anyway.
It's a good job the Jen isn't on tonight, you know.
I know. He's going to punch me.
Yeah, I know. I think
he's going to punch me. But you know what? There's another Polish striker that he can look forward to in the future.
He wouldn't punch you. He's a Gen. You know, he's a Gen. He would never do that, I can assure you.
But he must be really excited about Piontek that we have in Italy, who's Polish and who's rising up the ladder, who scored a goal a game in the beginning of the season. It's slowed down a little bit, but he's definitely one for the future. But Lewandowski, yeah, I mean, you saw, like, you know, if there is a way that he thinks the centre-back is going to start bullying him a little bit, you'll see he'll start changing the way he moves around the pitch. And I mean, that's not a great number 9.
I do agree with Mina. I was going to say that earlier, actually, but you were too busy accusing me of being a bully, Tim. I was going to say that a great number 9 has to be a bully.
Yeah,
can't allow himself to be bullied.
There's something like that in him.
Yeah.
Although he has to believe it and he has to be arrogant.
Well, we're coming on to Didier
Drogba was a victim as well, wasn't he? Oh. And he used to love a flop on the floor, didn't he? And you know, he'd blow over in a room with a stiff breeze. The fascinating thing for me about this whole debate is in over recent decades, the physical evolution of the game means that the players now they cover 2 or 3 times as much ground as they did, say, 30 or 40 years ago. And obviously the move there is to trying to get as many players involved in the play, whether it's with the ball or without the ball at any given time. You know, you freeze the frame on the video and you count how many players are involved in the play. And through that perception, your kind of goal hanger, old-fashioned number 9, he can be seen as a luxury player. But it's the most important thing in the game, isn't it? You know, the fella who can put the ball in the back of the net when the chances occur. It is the most important function that there is. Maybe on a kind of philosophical level, that World Cup final in 1974 between Holland and West Germany is that battle fought out. You know, because Holland, the Netherlands, they've got no time for a specialist number 9 finisher. They don't have him. Despise on Johan Cruyff, who was the brains behind that team. He absolutely despised that kind of player. He used to spit blood at Inzaghi when he was a pundit. You know, he didn't want that at all. He hated that. But who shot them down? Who won the game? You know, Gerd Müller. You know, did nothing for 88 minutes and he pops up and scores a fantastic goal. So it is.
I hate that number 9, though. I hate that kind of number 9, though.
Yeah, and the wonderful conclusion here is that there's no right way to play football. You can approach it in so many different ways. Just to ping it back to Mina, because he's a player, I suppose, from my region, but only vaguely, and that is Icardi, you know, who was brought up in Spain and and then went to Italy, but considers himself very much an Argentine and is now in the frame. He just managed to score his first goal for Argentina on Tuesday against Mexico. Very, very, very fine goal. And he's a player that you'll have seen much, much more of than I have, because he never played in South America. I've watched all of his games for Argentina, and it's like playing with 10 men until he scores.
Yeah, I told you. Yeah. This
Are
thing,
you a fan or not?
The way that I've spoken about Inter recently, you would think I'm a closet Inter fan. I can't make up my mind, okay? I cannot I've always been a person who's been a fan of the number 9, who's more like a number 10, you know? I told you, facilitators, guys that just elevate the level of play. A great number 9, in my opinion, is one that's flexible to what the coach wants and that can move and change according to the needs. That can be a predator in the box, or can be a guy that just elevates the level of play in the final third. And whether that be roaming around, taking up positions, bullying, assisting, that for me is a great striker, or is someone who can do all of it, But then you have specialists. And I feel with Icardi, the problem with having him on the pitch is you are playing with 10 men, and then he's just sort of just standing there in the box waiting for a chance given to him. And he gets very irritated if someone's in the box. It's like my space. Don't come in. This is my space. Let me dominate my space, And you've seen in Inter, Spalletti's trying to change this around. He's trying to bring Perisic a little bit closer to the goal, because Perisic hasn't had, the greatest start to the season. He's trying to create more avenues, have Nangolan perhaps, become more of a raider from midfield, there to exploit the chances. You can't do that when there's Icardi, because he doesn't like anyone playing close to him, because he likes clear, defined space, and he wants that to be his. Now, what's interesting about him is that he is a specialist, but he really only does need half a chance, and it's a goal. And he is quite genuinely the most efficient thing I've ever seen. He needs nothing. I mean, they can create absolutely nothing. They can play like terribly. They have been blasted and criticized non-stop this season about how awful their football has been. And yet they won 7 matches in a row. They've defeated Spurs. They've defeated PSV Eindhoven. They even managed to draw against Barcelona in the second time round. And all of this is based on the fact that he knows how to make the most of his chances. I'm not a fan of perhaps, everyone calls him a leader. I think his behavior I still expect a lot more from him, to be honest, for somebody who is considered the captain and the hope of Inter. It's based largely on his autobiography from a few years ago. I'm still not yet recovered from that. But in it, he just basically challenges the fans to beat them up. So anyway.
But you mentioned Didier Drogba. Sorry to cut you, Mina. Did you have another point to make there?
About Didier Drogba?
No. I was going to say, just going back to Didier Drogba, because Tom had sent us an email which says, as a Chelsea fan, we saw Didier Drogba officially retire this week.
Yeah.
I'd just like to get everyone's thoughts on his contribution to world football, how he ranks in the greats of all-round world, great strikers, your Batistuttas, your Ronaldos, etc.
Yeah.
Either one, Tim?
He's one of the best that we've ever seen.
He was terrific. He was like a one-man forward line, wasn't he?
He really
you could play him
was.
up front on his own, and he would work the entire line. He would do. I want from your number 9s. I want someone who you can play up to him, and he can play back to goal, and he's got the pace to work the channels and be slipped behind the attacking line. There aren't that many who can do the both. He could do both. He could score penalty area. He could score from range. He could combine back to goal. He did like a flop over, didn't he? That used to annoy me no end. The way that he used to go to ground all the time. But such a wonderfully complete striker. Why? How can you like that? Defend him. How can you like it?
Look, you have to take advantage of the little things if you can get them. If it means that you manipulate a referee, then so be it. Do you remember this wonderful time when Raheem Sterling came close to goal and he stood on his feet and actually didn't earn the penalty? I'm not counting this horrific time in the Champions League when he tripped and basically was given a penalty. He didn't actually play to that. But there was one point, I don't remember which match it was, but he was through on goal and basically got heavily tackled, should have fallen over and gotten the penalty, didn't fall over, stayed on his feet, remained honest and lost the opportunity. for me, that would drive me insane if I was the coach of the team. So
And
it's not that I
does,
want you
it
to
does.
flop over. I don't want you to flop over necessarily, but I do like pushing the boundaries of what is acceptable and what is legal.
It's not nice to watch it though, but Didier Drogba's argument, I remember the time when he was getting criticism for it here when he was playing at Chelsea. His argument for it was, look, hang on, who are you to say what the impact of that push or shove or whatever it was made on me? If I'm pushed and it breaks my stride, yeah, I have the right to go over.
Absolutely. Look, it's annoying when people are exaggerating what the fall is. Like Neymar, when he's rolling 900 times, there's no, I don't know what, he's not been bulldozed, so there's no need to exaggerate the fall this much. But if you do feel something, and I'm saying you're not diving, if you feel something and you fall to the floor, then get whatever advantage that you can get because it's illegal. Why shouldn't you be compensated for something that was illegal,
I also am made to think, I'm sorry about this, it's not nice to watch it. Generally not nice, and I become as irritated as anybody else. But when you see players, defenders, going to, interject in somebody else's stride towards goal, so much so that they make contact with that person, I'm thinking, well, why'd you have to do that? I think, why did you have to? That's what I feel as a fan. When I see, a lot of fans are shouting at the opposition striker for falling over easily, but I'm shouting at my defender and saying, why'd you have to touch him? He's still got a job to do to get that goal in the back of the net. Why'd you have to do it? No, I think he should do.
This is where it gets really confusing because there was an interview with Ancelotti over what he thinks of Napoli and, and being in charge of someone who's like Dries Mertens, who's a smaller player, moves around so well, mobility and uses his technique to score goals. And then he's got Milik, who's more of a reference point. And he was talking about this and he just said, Maradona is the kind of player I would have loved to have trained because he was fair. That was an interesting point that he made. He said he was fair. You could tackle him till the cows came home, but he wouldn't fall unless there was no option but to fall. And he knew how to withstand a tackle. He knew how to withstand heavy contact. He was fair in the way he played his football and he let his technique and brilliance shine through. And I do understand, if Didier Drogba was on my side, I want him to flop over if it's going to gain the advantage. That's who I am. I'm naturally going to look for all the ways that I can make the most of things, which is why sometimes I'm scared about technology because there's a lot of people like me. But at the same time, if you are a great number 9, then you will never need anything to speak for you. You will never need the small advantages. It's like England reaching the semi-final. They relied a lot on set pieces, on clever ways to make the most of what they could, But at times, football is subjective and it's a matter of opinion or whatever it is. It depends on, at the time, if you're a great team, you don't rely on anything but your style of football. And that speaks for itself because Real Madrid will win 3 Champions Leagues in a row, and yet everyone continues to mention Barcelona's name. So, you live by your philosophy or you win by trophies, whatever it is. I respect both sides of it. And it's what you prefer to be remembered for.
I haven't forgotten the underarm question that I was going to bowl you. Chris from Sheffield says, Usain Bolt. Isn't it good to hear that name on a World Football phone-in? Usain Bolt was recently described, because he is, of course, a footballer nowadays, was recently described as having a first touch like a trampoline. Can you think, it's not nice, can you think of any professional, that's not nice at all, the image is horrible. Can you think of any professional footballer in your region that has overcome such a technical deficiency to become moderately successful? Tim first.
How about giving the ball to Rivaldo and saying kick it with your right foot?
Oh, that's terrible. Yeah, no, I wouldn't do that, mate.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah, I would not do that.
How about you?
Sorry, go on.
He was so good. He was so unbelievably talented. I mean, left-footers are a mystery, aren't they? I mean, they are the greatest thing in football, I think, left-footers. And part of the mystery is there are some left footers who just can't, the right foot hardly is hardly any good. Even
Lee Sharp from Man United.
Yeah,
do you remember that? I remember seeing him do
and
literally.
he was a righty, I think. He couldn't do it with his left. David Rocastle was like that as well.
I thought he was left. No, I think he was left. Lee Sharp. I thought he was a left. I think he's a lefty and he couldn't deal with... That's what I remember in any case. If I'm wrong, apologies. But I remember him as a left footer and I just remember seeing him do like a 180-degree turn to get the ball on his whichever playing foot he played at. It's like not nice.
But Rivaldo couldn't give a five-yard square pass on his right foot and was still a great player. So that's all. Or how about another left footer, Rivellino? Couldn't take penalties. Hated taking penalties. He was a free kick specialist. The magnificent free kicks, but he absolutely detested taking penalties.
Mina, anybody from your region?
Oh, Pippo Inzaghi staying on side. No, I'm joking. Let's see. There was this interesting story that was relayed to me by an Italian journalist, but it's recently. It's basically, I don't know if it's Kyle Walker, but I want to say it's Kyle Walker. I just don't know. I don't feel like I've concentrated enough on this detail. But apparently Pep was teaching him how to receive and control the ball with the inside of his foot. And that astounded me because I couldn't understand how he reached so far. And I don't know if it's Kyle Walker for sure, but I don't know how he would have reached this point in his career without knowing how to do that.
Ask the Spud, not me.
So I'd like anyone, if they know if it was Kyle Walker or not, or whatever it is, but apparently he only knows how to control the ball when he receives it with the outside of his foot, which I found very interesting. But it was about how, to ensure the speed of Pep Guardiola's game at Manchester City, that he needed to learn how to do it with the inside of his foot. So that's one story that I'm rather amazed. But yeah, I guess his left foot is using... Wasn't there a story as well about Zidane going a whole season trying to just do everything with his left foot to see if he just could? Because he'd finished all his challenges.
I'm not sure that was his best season if it happened.
I think he always had a great season.
By the way, I was in Spudland earlier, Tim, and...
What's the new stadium looking like? You like it?
Well, here's a funny thing. The person that I was giving out some awards for a housing trust there. Oh, it was a really emotional thing. It was a fantastic award thing, I must say. But anyway, the person I was giving out the awards with is the chairman of the Tottenham Hotspur Foundation. So she was telling me that she was suggesting that we should do a programme from the new stadium when it launches. I think she's going to try and set it up. I suggested that Nihal should do it. I'll have a word with him because I saw him last night as well. But anyway, what I was going to say about Spudland itself is that I bumped into somebody there who was an avid listener to the World Football Phone-In, and he said, I didn't miss a single episode, but then, and he pointed to his missus, then I got all loved up, he said, which might explain why we haven't had any calls tonight. Well, all our avid fans are all loved up tonight. Well, we can allow that. At least Ed on the Isle of Wight's not all loved up, are you, Ed? Oh, don't take it the wrong way. Don't take it the wrong way.
No, I know that. And is your wife playing here this summer?
Is she? Oh.
Is she playing next summer?
No, I remember you talking about her playing before.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Next summer's a long time away, and
well,
I don't know what.
2019, and it's also. Can I tell you one very quick thing?
Of course you
the
can.
Greatest driver of all time is Ayrton Senna.
Yeah. I wouldn't argue with that.
He's my god.
Yeah, I wouldn't argue with
anyway,
that. By the way, this is the World Football Phone-In.
It is the World Football Phone-In. And one thing I wanted to say to you is, number one, on Google, the phone doesn't work, as in it gives the wrong number. And number two, what I wanted to ask is for Tim Vickery, and Tim, I think Arsenal have unleashed the new Vieira in Lucas Torreira, as in Uruguay.
Very fine player. Very fine player. Little Pac-Man. Solves you problems all over the field.
Yeah, but is he really the new Vieira?
I don't know. He's done something to Arsenal. He's done something. I'm like Dotun's Nigerian, I'm Norwegian, but it's like Solskjaer for Man United. He made us win, and Torreira has just given Arsenal that kick up the backside that he needed. Do you think?
No, I do. Yeah, I think he's an excellent player, a little Pac-Man who solves you problems all over the field. If you could probably cut Patrick Vieira in half, and you'd have two Lucas Torreiras. Two Lucas Torreiras, one in front of the other, one on top of the other, would probably be about the same height as Patrick Vieira. But yeah, no, I see what you mean. He's a real driving force in the midfield. He can do a little bit of everything. And I think he's a big character as well, the man born in Frei Bentos. So I think Arsenal have made a wonderful acquisition.
Really? Frei Bentos? Is that where he's born?
Really? Yeah, he's from Frei Bentos. I knew you'd enjoy a little bit of bully beef there.
You got me good and proper there, I'll give you that. But why were you so resistant, Mina, to the comparison that Ed was making with Patrick Vieira?
I guess because Patrick Vieira, for me, is legendary. I mean, his intelligence on the pitch is, I don't know, it's a little bit unrivaled, to be honest. Torreira, I watched a lot for Sampdoria. I think he's very good. I think there are still a few weaknesses to his game, winning certain duels, positioning perhaps at times. I think that he's a great talent, and I think he's perfect for Unai Emery's squad, and what is required of him there, he can give his best. But the difference when I think of judging players, which is probably why I'm really harsh, is firstly, I've always just watched big teams. I've actually never watched local sides or smaller teams. But it's also about being able to transport a player to any club and have him still repeat his brilliance. And you know how there are some players that just really know how to achieve something in one league or for one team, but then you take them out of that and they can fall apart. Vieira was the kind that you can put anywhere, and he was that good, right? Like that's why he was a legend of football. I don't know. That's why I just don't know about saying that with everyone. I don't think you can put Torreira in Real Madrid and the guy's going to shine. Does that make sense? But he is very young and he's very new, so I hope so, because we loved watching him in Italy, and you can't judge him that much yet because it's been a few months at Arsenal, and he didn't have that long in Sampdoria either. Certainly one for the future, but I don't know whether... Let's give him a few more months. Let's see if discipline continues to be strong and whether his positioning improves.
Yeah, Ed, thanks a lot for that. Appreciate it. I'm just moving on because I've got so many questions. Oh, by the way, I know that my missus is playing some Butlins this weekend. Don't ask me why. This is from... Or where, rather than why. She might slap me if I say, no, she doesn't slap me. At least that, well, yeah, okay. Sandy says, who's going to be the next South American superstar that will take Europe by storm? Is the next Messi coming through the ranks or not?
Well, Messi is one of those that comes, once in a... I haven't seen anyone of that level since Messi, quite frankly. There are players to be excited about. I'm excited about...
But not from South America.
South America doesn't count.
Okay.
Nice try. Okay. We'll pass this over to Europe in a minute.
Yeah, in a minute.
If you've got someone. There's a lad at Santos I'm excited by who's already signed. He's only 17. He's already signed for Real Madrid, so he's going over soon. Rodrigo, who physically he's not quite there yet. But he scored plenty of goals for Santos this year, and he's yet another of these kind of strikers in wide positions. But what makes him different is you can see him thinking. Vinicius Junior, who's joined Real Madrid, is a real instinctive talent. Whether he'll be able to translate to top class European football, the promise that he showed in his brief time at Flamengo remains to be seen. But he's an instinctive, sinewy, very athletic talent. Rodrigo's hasn't yet got that kind of physicality, but he's more mature in terms of his decision making, and there seems to be real quality there. So I'm quite excited about him. There's a Colombian centre back I think the world of called Carlos Cuesta, who perhaps hasn't come on as much in the last year as I would have hoped, and the change of coach in his side, Atlético Nacional, didn't benefit him. But there is something of a little Baresi there. You know, he's so cool, and he leads the line very well, and he real class in his positioning and in his timing in the tackle. So I still have high hopes of Cuesta as a centre back, as an attacking talent. I like Rodrigo of Santos.
And when you said that he's not quite there physically, what do you mean? Is he too slight or what?
Yeah. I mean, he would be already in the Brazil squad, and they think the world of him. But he's not there physically, so he loses on the 50-50 duels. He's just not there yet. Come back in another year or two. Let's see.
So they're not going down the George Best route and bulking up with some Guinness or anything like that.
Well, I'm sure that there will be plenty of muscular work that goes into him. And when he comes over to Real Madrid, I'm sure they'll work on his upper body strength, because all of that is so important these days. But, you know, you're born with a certain body, and your physique has limitations. But when you've got intelligence of movement and of positioning, that means that at least you're limiting the amount of times when you can be beaten physically. Because if you're one step ahead of your opponent, you're finding that space, and you're finding the space to play. And by the time the tackle comes in, the ball has already moved.
I think the clubs would be sued today if they went down the Guinness route, by the way. The old days was a different time, obviously. And how about from Europe, Mina? Is there anybody coming through from Europe that might set light to our Premier League, amongst other things?
Are we talking about just forwards, in the sense that, when we think of Messi, you think of...
No, not necessarily, because the question was superstar. Who's the next footballing superstar that will take Europe by storm?
Oh, this is so hard, because, what can you... Honestly, I think that this is the gold. We're going back to watching Dutch stars really light up European football again. And there are so many talents in PSV Eindhoven and in Ajax. I wouldn't know where to begin in terms of, from De Ligt as a centre-back to Van de Beek, who's just been amazing. Perhaps the best one is maybe Frankie de Jong. He is just the one that everyone is looking at. His passing accuracy, he's a midfielder. His passing accuracy is something out of this planet. His intelligence, the dribbling, knowing when to dribble, when to pass, understanding the game. He's been scouted and looked upon by really honestly everyone from Real Madrid and obviously Barcelona. Jose Mourinho famously said that he always wanted a Dutch player in every one of his teams because of their highly, of their technique and their ability to do everything. And he is that guy. More importantly, he's a guy who performs under pressure. He's very composed. He plays with a veteran's mentality despite his young age. So I definitely think he is one to look upon. Again, I don't know about physicality. There's been some question marks as to whether he's really ready to make it in a big club. What's interesting when you watch Kylian Mbappe, who I think is and will become the superstar of the level of Ronaldo and Messi, was that his decision making at times wasn't great. I'll tell you that much, and it can still not be that great. But he plays with this desire to learn every day. And so often now we see a lot of kids, and even I remember watching Paul Pogba when he was a bit younger, they don't know themselves, or they don't know what it is that they necessarily want to be. My issue always with Paul Pogba when he was at Juventus is that he kind of wanted to be everything, for example. And that made me think his development would stall. He wanted to be a little bit like Zidane. He wanted to be a little like Patrick Vieira. He wanted to be a little bit like Redondo. And it was like, well, okay, but who are you? What do you think you can do? What's going to make you an individual? Don't try to be everything. Try to be you. And I think that's the question mark. Kylian Mbappe seems to, from a young age, knew exactly what it is that he wanted to be. And his ability to perform under pressure, his ability to learn from different coaches, to play alongside different talent, to read the game, to always push the team forward, to press defenses back. He's really an exceptional talent. And I don't know if there's anyone on that level in comparison to him in Europe. And I do think that he may well overtake everyone going forward.
Incidentally, 3 people have now gotten in contact and said that it was Raheem Sterling, not Kyle Walker, you were talking about.
Raheem
Sterling,
good. With the controlling on the with the inside of his foot.
Yeah, exactly.
So Raheem Sterling doesn't know how to control the ball with the inside of his foot. Really?
This, according to Jonathan, he'd always control the ball with the outside of the boot, but apparently that method was slowing down his play, making life easier for defenders, and he was doing it because he thought it looked cool. And then Jonathan adds, academies, eh? Rolls his eyes.
Wait, so he did it. Oh, that's so interesting. Okay, so because I thought it was Kyle Walker. So, well, the story was told to me, it was a defensive player. So apparently not Kyle Walker.
Yeah.
So he did it to be cool. So he actually knows how to do it. He's just trained himself to do it with the outside of his foot. I want to know whether he's actually been taught how to do it with the inside of his foot, because I can't imagine how he's reached such a high stage of his career. And he is Raheem Sterling in particular is a great player. I don't rate Kyle Walker, So that sounds so bad. Sometimes I just make so many comments that are just flippant like that. Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, Kyle Walker is very good. Don't get me wrong. Yeah, you always have to get backtrack now. But I think
run down the right wing and then lob the ball in.
But he's not Raheem Sterling in terms of technique. Let's be honest.
He delivers a perfect ball on top speed as well. He's running at top speed, manages to deliver a ball.
Come on, he's not a £50 million rated fullback. Come on.
Yeah. I wouldn't like to comment.
Raheem Sterling is a great player.
Yeah.
So for Raheem Sterling to get that far in his career and do everything that he's done for both club and country and not know how to control the ball on the inside of his foot, which evidently takes seconds away from you pushing forward, and he's got such speed, then that's very interesting. And how has he not been taught that? So I want to know whether he's been taught that and he's just forgotten it because he likes to do it with the outside of his boot or not. That's it.
Yeah, good question. Hi, I'm not sure if this will get to you in time, but it has. On the debate of a number 9, it depresses me that no one has mentioned the legendary Ronaldo, El Fenomeno, the greatest number 9 of all time, the original Ronaldo, that is. He did everything, dribble from his own half, play in the box, linked up his teammates, destroyed defenders and goalkeepers one-on-one. Come on, guys. Come on,
Yeah,
Tim.
but he was the best of all time, but that wasn't the question, right? Because obviously, no one can ever keep up with him.
Yeah, but Tim should have at least mentioned him. It's his region after all.
No, because... who's around now? We weren't asked who's the greatest of all time.
No, but you should have just
and he was.
We were being asked about Lewandowski and players like that.
Yeah, that's true. But you should have mentioned
one thing he
in
didn't
passing.
One thing he didn't do was head the ball. He did everything else, but he couldn't. He didn't like heading the ball. It hurts.
Right. Oh, right. Really?
He didn't like that.
Could he do it though?
It's true.
Did he ever score a goal with that?
No, he didn't. Not very much. I think he was one of those players who kind of headed the ball with his eyes closed, thinking, "It's going to hurt." It's going to hurt. He didn't fancy that.
No, it does hurt. Be real now. I whacked the back of my head.
But he was the fastest player running with the ball I've ever seen.
He was fast.
Just make him running with the ball. One of the greatest sights I've seen in football. It was a World Cup qualifier between Brazil and Argentina in 2004. And it was in Belo Horizonte, where they ended up losing 7-1 to the Germans in 2014. And this was going to be, the big players, they come out on the big occasions. And this was going to be the biggest game that he ever played for his country in Brazil. And it was in the stadium where he made his name with Cruzeiro as a 17-year-old. So he was really, really up for it. And Brazil won 3-1. Argentina played all the football. And he scored the 3 goals. They were all penalties, but he won all 3. So not only did he score all 3 penalties, but he won all 3 penalties just because they couldn't get, the only way they could get close to him was to foul him. It was just like watching someone from a different planet, an extraordinary player. His running with the ball was so quick, powerful, capable of changing directions. And what I used to think was magnificent about him was the way that as he bore down on goal, he could decelerate, keep his head still and pick his spots. He was just a magnificent finisher with that pace and power. Really, and you wonder what he would have achieved without all of those knee problems that he suffered.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I was saying, like when you choose who the best player of the world is, a lot of the times you talk about consistency, right? Like Lionel Messi and they did it over a number of years, but Ronaldo at his moment, if you can judge a player just by his very best moments, he's got to be the best player we've ever seen. For me, anyway.
Rooney, as in Wayne, is the best player one of our listeners ever seen as a number 9. Broke records, won titles, came short, went long, headers, left, right, free kicks, top player. Not
fine player.
Player. Was he a number 9 for a long time?
He could do that, couldn't he? He could do the 10 as well. He's one of Mina's favourites, clearly.
Yeah, he does everything. He's a hard worker, but sometimes he was the only thing that bothered me, because I do love a hard worker, believe me. It's that sometimes he would make the problem of too many cooks, because he would feel so much responsibility to help every department that he just became confusing at times on a tactical level. But definitely a great player. But that's not necessarily what I mean by a guy. That's not necessarily my favourite type of striker. I know what you mean by he's more of a facilitator, but then Harry Kane is not really just a striker either.
No. True.
But he's a number 9.
When I think of just a striker, maybe Gerd Müller, and Icardi, those are the guys that I'm not too keen on, because I do think they're more luxury players.
This from Keith in Leeds, going back to the VAR question. VAR is the same as the review system in cricket. It weakens the referee and umpire. They almost need not to be there. So many of us were giving out LBW when we knew we had hit the ball, but the umpire's decision was final. No constant analysis from the sidelines. Something of the human element will be lost with much stop-start in the action. It's all negative, he says.
But there's still lots of human element in VAR, and that's the point I think that people haven't picked up on enough. That the decision being made by the video referee is not black, white mathematical calculation. It's still in many cases a question of interpretation by a human, and then you've got the human element of the relationship between the VAR referee and the referee on the field before the final decision is made. There are so many human elements of VAR that I think people haven't looked into enough.
Absolutely. Yeah. The only question mark you ever have in black and white is if the ball crossed the back, the line or not. That's the only thing you can definitively answer yes or no, because otherwise it's all a question of interpretation. Even offside is difficult.
And so much of that depends on the exact moment at which the frame is stopped.
And the perfect camera angle, because how many angles do they get,
Yes.
Yeah, do you know how relieved you sounded when that question came about the original Ronaldo, Mina? You're like, phew, thank goodness it wasn't one, a number 9 from my region that listeners were talking about. Well, anyway, you've got one now. You've got one. This is to the Colonel, this text. And spelled Cyrnol. So I'm presuming it's you rather than Team Vickery, Team Vickery, as those Brazilians were telling us yesterday. Oh, is Team Vickery? How are we on with Team Vickery? It was fun. Those guys were fun. Anyway,
who said that?
These Brazilians that came on last week, they told us everything that Tim didn't want them to tell us about him in Brazil. Anyway, to the Colonel, hear you talking about number 9 voted Juventus best ever foreign import John Charles. Il Gigante Buona scored about 100 goals in 5 seasons in a time when defenders could get away with anything in those times, and he never got booked. He was a true legend and world-class, and a world-class centre-half on top of that. What would his value be today, do you reckon, Mina?
Monetarily or metaphorically?
I think they meant monetarily. Where would he be, do you think?
Off the charts. A guy who can take everything with stand area tackle. I mean, John Charles had everything from his understanding of the game, his ability to win duels, his strength, his pace. He really was the full package. And it's true. And there was no tougher defending than what he faced during his time. And he withstood all of it. I mean, he was... There are reasons why when you go into Juventus Stadium, there are so many different posters and quotes attributed to him. Monetarily, he'd be obviously one of the highest paid if he was around today. playing today and being sold left. But it's a different game now. You can be the best player despite the fact that maybe you can't withstand a tackle, or what is seen as important nowadays is not what it was back then. This is why there's constantly this romantic notions of, oh, football's not what it used to be, like I remember watching it. And I'm an 80s kid, and for me, there's no better World Cup than 1986, Not because back then you could do anything to a striker, do any type of way to stop him. You could kung fu kick him in the chest and you still got away with it, It was the days of every single country in the world had legends playing for them, whether it was Platini or Laudrup or Maradona, or everywhere you looked around, it was just talent upon talent, and it was about suffering and going through it despite how many obstacles you faced. And I feel like nowadays, a lot of them are lucky a lot of these forwards are lucky to not have to face that anymore, where you do get away with winning games based on a handball, and you'll get your 1-0 and you can just defend for the rest of the game, or it's based on, it's different. So I'm a romantic. So for me, I don't like this new way of doing stuff. I do believe in technology because it requires it nowadays. In my heart of hearts, I will always prefer it to be a contact sport where you can get away with most things, unless it's like, endangering your life.
Do you think that We Close Our Eyes by Go West was the high point of Western civilization? And it's been downhill ever since.
You had to take it back there. You had to take it back there, didn't you? You had to take it back there.
I wish I never. You know so many details. You clung on to that KFC detail about me, and I could never live it down. And I shouldn't have told you these things.
It's all filed away for future use. Don't you worry.
It is. As is your little secret, Shimviko. So, what do you think of my
secrets? My life's an open book.
What do you think of my Portuguese Brazilian accent, though?
It's come on as a result of your experience last week. So, but I think your Nigerian is still better.
Of course it is. But only a Nigerian who happened to be in Scotland at the time when I heard him speak, if you see what I mean.
You didn't answer the supplementary question.
Yeah, what is it? Why do Nigerians fly first class? No, why? Yeah, quickly, either of you. Nigerians flying, British Airways. First class.
Fewer seats
It's one
available?
for you. You're the hometown boy.
Yeah, well, it's because they're in the money. They're in the money. Thanks, guys.